Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to kick things off. My name's April Oliphant and I am the president of AMA. And here with me is also Laura. I don't know which box you can see, but I'm pointing. She's our president of AMA. And to start, I really just want to extend a warm welcome and thank you for each of you to join us here today. Want to start off and really tell you guys a little bit more about AMA as well as AMA. Tongue twister, I know. We have definitely been staples in Atlanta for many years, bringing together marketers with educational content as well as networking. Over the years, we've continued to really strengthen the partnership together between our associations. We have conversations that really drive home how we can really not just individually work in silos, but really unite our Atlanta-based communities together. I really hope that some of you have actually attended our holiday parties, which are really fun. I mean, what a memory to really think about pre-2020 and networking, as well as what it's like to actually shake hands. We really appreciate also each of you following us on this journey. We've definitely had to pivot our organizations through the pandemic and really still being able to cater to our marketers' needs. So very excited to have you guys today, but also really look forward to the time where we can be buzzing back in a room together. Additionally, it needs to go not without saying we have to have a really big thank you to our shared partner, NEBO agency. We work with, both associations work with NEBO on a number of things for events that we really drive home these very unique events like we're doing today with some incredible speakers. So very excited to bring you guys today this content, but also very support, especially in today's event, because they were very instrumental. So I'm going to throw things off to my other box, wherever you are, Laura, on the screen, and she's going to touch on our final topics to get us started for today.
Sure. Thank you very much, April. I am moving to the next slide and it's not, there we go. So as the volatility, really rolled in this year with all of the issues related to social injustice and obviously the emergence of COVID, we started conversations with AMA this summer, just related to what we could potentially do to support our community of marketers and really work to represent the diverse nature of the marketing world in Atlanta and also the surrounding communities, and really just serving to support the culture here and build out our programming and other areas of support to really reinforce that. We partnered with NEBO and facilitated the conversation that we've set up today. And obviously, our goal is to have a very transparent and uncomfortable conversation. And we feel that the nature of this conversation being uncomfortable is absolutely fundamental, because that will help reinforce growth for us. My mother used to always say to me that it takes grit to make a pearl, really meaning that discomfort is important to create things that are truly beautiful and really helping to elevate and support change in the world. So, we really hope that this conversation can be super transparent and, like I said, uncomfortable. If you do have questions over the course of the conversation, please post those in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom right of your screen. And we are going to have a Q&A session at the end. And, we definitely hope to encourage dialogue. So please feel free to post those transparent questions that you have. In terms of other technical considerations, I think that there's not that much else to know. Everybody's already automatically muted for the actual panel. I would like to now introduce our moderator, Zing Shah. She is the Global Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Starbucks. She leads the inclusion and diversity teams, and she also serves as a member of the leadership team for the Americas. She helped develop the strategy to embed equity in all of the programmatic activities for Starbucks, leading governance and daily administration of the global retail organization. She's currently helping Starbucks achieve 100% global pay equity by working with experts to develop best practices and tools to address systemic barriers impeding equal pay for equal work. Prior to joining Starbucks, she was at the forefront of leading organizational change through diversity. She was the first person to hold the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer position for the NBA. And she served in that capacity for the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena for 5 years. Zing, we are so thrilled to have you join us today. And with that, I will pass along to you.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, April, for your opening words. I am just so excited to be here today. I think this conversation is absolutely necessary. And so when you all graciously asked me to help moderate this conversation, I just became so filled with energy and optimism by the insights that we'll be able to gain from all of these wonderful practitioners on the phone with us today. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Like Laura said, I'm the Global Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer at Starbucks. And as many of you know, Starbucks, we are just such a dynamic brand. We touch over 100 million customers. We have over 400,000 partners, which is another word for employees. And we really do let our mission and values lead us in everything that we do, with a lens of serving the customers and the communities in the best way possible. So that being said, let me get started by introducing our lovely panelists. And I'll start out with Andrew McCaskill. He goes by Drew. He and I have known each other for many years. He happens to be a D&I, diversity and inclusion practitioner at Facebook, in addition to being a culture and economics contributor and so much more. So Andrew, welcome.
I had to unmute myself. I'm super excited to be here. You know, Zing knows this, but Atlanta's home, so I'm super excited to be participating in this for myriad reasons. And I get to see her too. So
great to see you. Next, we have James LaDuca. James is the Senior Director of Global Inclusion and Diversity at Twitter. What a job. I know he's going to bring some great insights to the table. So James, welcome.
Zing, hi. Hi everyone, I'm James. I use he, him pronouns, and I am just thrilled to be here. Thank you, Zing, for being our moderator. I can't wait to meet and interact with all of our panelists. Thank all of you for coming to this. I know the demands of your time are many, so we are thrilled that you are here. And fair warning, you are finding me pandemic parenting / sheltering in place 2 children under the age of 3 with my husband, and I can almost guarantee you will meet one of them before this is over. So let's get the conversation going.
I can only imagine what it's like having a house full of, I've got some little kids in my house too. I've got 2 under 3 as well. So we're in.
Fantastic.
Next, I'd love to introduce Kristen Puckett. Kristen is the Director of Social Media Strategy for Brookdale. Kristen, welcome to this conversation.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate everybody joining today. My heart goes out to you who have little ones at home. Luckily, my kids are in high school and college, so I cannot imagine what you all are going through, but I'm happy to be here today. It's that great to get up and have a reason to put lipstick on.
Thank you so much. Haley Malgieri is the Associate Director of Strategy at Nebo. Hello, Haley.
Hey there. I love this that we're all entering as our name gets announced. I imagine us kind of like running down, you know, making a big entrance. But it's great to be here. I also work closely with Kristen as well as a strategist on the Brookdale account on Nebo, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. And last but certainly not least, we have Joe DeMiro joining us as the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of Hawkeye. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Zing, it's awesome to be here and great to see everybody who was able to join today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So let's just jump right into the content. I'll set it up by giving us a little bit of context for what we're going to be talking about. Obviously, when 2020 came and January 1st hit, we had no idea what we were in for as a society. This year has just been extraordinary and unprecedented in so many ways. We'll start by talking about the global pandemic. COVID-19 really just came out of the blue, and it was so unexpected. And I think what has been the most alarming and the most devastating is how many people have lost their lives, in addition to how many of us have really tried to change our lifestyles around working. and around parenting and around elder care and all of the myriad of challenges that we've just had to face in real time. In addition to that, we have seen social unrest, civil unrest, social justice issues come to the forefront, particularly with the very public murders that we have witnessed, starting with Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia. We've also all witnessed what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, Breonna Taylor, and the list just goes on and on. It's so unfortunate, but really has sparked this national outrage and also a national movement that has created so much rhetoric and so much dialogue around what can we do to make things better? What can we possibly do so that we don't have to witness these atrocities anymore? And then finally, I'll just talk about the forest fires that we've seen in the West Coast. I currently live in Seattle. I go back and forth between Atlanta and Seattle, but I'll just tell you, the West Coast has been through a lot with these natural disasters. And so we don't want to talk about everything negative in the world. We obviously know that there are some positive things, but these are things that we cannot ignore. And we must address them as both marketers and diversity and inclusion experts head on, because we do have customers and clients that we serve, and we also have the public that's watching. And so we're going to talk today about how our brands are really just reckoning with all of this. What are we doing internally in our organizations, in addition to externally, to ensure that everyone that we serve understands our positions on some of these extremely challenging issues. So that being said, I will just start off with a general question that anybody can answer. I would hope a couple of you would chime in, but the question is that each of our brands has faced really unique challenges due to COVID-19 and also the racial justice issues that we've seen. How is this specifically impacting your organization? So let me start with, it looks like I'm going to have to do the Socratic method for this one. So I'll start with Drew.
Well, I'm really, when I think about what's going on in sort of the zeitgeist, I'm an African-American, I'm working in diversity and inclusion work. It's really important to me to like sort of level set like my, the way I think about this and the way how I come to every work conversation with the knowledge that, we're in the midst of this pandemic, and Black and Hispanic people are 4.7 times are being sent to the hospital 4.7 times at a 4.7 times higher rate than our non-Hispanic white counterparts for this pandemic and this disease. And so seeing in my own community and friends and family present danger that COVID has created is more than just being able to go to work and say, hey, are there things that we can do to help out with this? I'm a part of a team that has pledged over $150 million to the African-American community in the world post Black Lives Matter. And, we did something very similar for COVID relief writ large. But speaking at the level of like just the larger brand issue that's there is, I think that I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that our customers and our consumers and our constituents are looking to brands to do things that they've never looked to brands to do before. I think there are a lot of folks who are so disillusioned with the standard institutions that we've always gone to for help, right? To rally around us. There's a lot of disappointment in government right now, regardless of how you feel about politics, just in general. And consumers and people who are using our platforms are looking, and employees are looking to brands to do something that we've never seen them demand from us before. And that's to be a moral agent of some sort, right? To impact and impart change, and to be on the right side of history. And we're all building sort of muscle memory around that, because it really is something that we've not had consumers or employees demand from us in the way that we're seeing employees demand for us to participate and to jump in right now. And I think that that's something that we're all learning how to do, and we're sort of building that plane while we're flying it because of the demands of the moment. But it's interesting that, I just the numbers that I've looked at, Black Enterprise said that there was something like $3.2 billion that's already been pledged to communities of color, particularly the Black community in the world, to fight for racial justice. I think what happens is now is after everybody makes their commitments and their pledges, we've all got to figure out what does accountability look like too on the back end of this, right? And that's going to require every single organization to have a level of cultural competency inside their building every single day, that they may not have currently today. And I think that becomes really incumbent upon diversity and inclusion practitioners to help our companies figure out how do we get that talent in-house. But then on the flip of it, if we don't have that talent in-house right now, how do we go out and get the right help from agencies and partners, et cetera?
You raised some great points, Drew, and I think you're absolutely right about the accountability piece. Recently at Starbucks, we just launched a program in which we will be tying executive compensation to IMD outcomes. And I think when the news came out last week, there were a lot of questions around how are we actually going to do this? And are we going to be incentivizing executives to do diversity work? And it's very clear through the way that we've designed the program that no one is getting an incentive to do this work. We're starting at 100 and deducting when you don't do the work. So I think that, compensation is such an interesting tool because you really find out what people are made of and how much they're willing to put on the line in terms of the tactical work that it takes to do this when your salary and your bonus is at risk. And so, it's not meant to be punitive, but it really is a way for us to hold our most senior level executives accountable and saying that we're going to put our own salaries on the line. We're going to ensure that we're getting this done right. And we're not just talking, but we're acting. So thank you, Drew, for your insights. Joe, I want to ask you the same question. You're the chief executive officer, which means that at the end of the day, no matter what's going on in your organization, the accountability falls on you. And people look to you for answers and leadership. So, from your perspective, how has your company been facing these issues, both internally and publicly?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And Drew, I really relate to some things you said. It's funny. I'm one of the youngest CEOs that my holding company has ever put in this kind of a leadership role. And I have to say that when COVID hit, one of my big concerns was just around the role, Drew, I think what you're pointing out between employer and employee, when lines of work and personal life start to blur, when we don't have the other institutions surrounding us like we normally would, whether that's family or friends or church in a physical sense. We don't have our sports teams to be able to just blow off some steam and have fun with. People really turn to their employers to say, well, what can you do to support me and my family in this situation? And then when you layer on all of the social justice issues that have come since the lockdown in March 12th, it's only made that relationship and those demands more acute. So as somebody who cares very, very much for the safety, well-being, the mental health, the emotional health of my team, that's one aspect. The other aspect is we are often finding ourselves in the role of being good stewards of the clients we get to work with, every single day. And those same clients are kind of turning to us and saying, what role do we have a role in this? What role do we have? And so it's interesting because as their customers are looking to the brands they do business with to answer that same call, we've had to help counsel our clients in that regard too. So I think what we've done, saying to answer your question, is on a couple of fronts. So first and foremost is that this really comes down to values in how you incentivize and punish, reward and punish based on how people align to those values. So we have put diversity, equity, and inclusion at the heart and soul of what we stand for, because in a creative context, it is a cornerstone of success. It makes us the culture better, it makes our work better, it makes our relationship with clients better. And at a minimum, can't we all just agree that people should be able to show up at work and be safe and feel safe and feel safe in terms of presenting who they are and their identity so that they can put great ideas forward. So we've put that very much at the heart and soul of what we're about, including how we're incentivizing and rewarding our executive team aligned against some commitments that we have made throughout this process. So we're putting our money where our mouth is on that front. The second part of it is we've done our best to try to take what's worked within our own organization and across our clients to create a playbook and a product that other clients can start to benefit from. So we've created a Culture-Fi process that basically allows organizations to start to ask themselves some tough questions and to start putting diversity, equity, and inclusion at the forefront of the priorities, how they go to market and so forth. So it's been challenging, but I also have to say it's been incredibly galvanizing and energizing to be a part of this, because it's allowed us to have conversations about values and ethics and where we want to go and where we want to be in a way that has been more accelerated than perhaps it would have been otherwise. And I'm really actually optimistic about the conversations that are happening and the priority that this has put on this topic in the creative community.
That's wonderful. And I love that you're sharing best practices. I think oftentimes what happens is that in our organizations, we talk to ourselves and we go on this journey alone. And what we're realizing is that we really need to just leverage one another. And we've got to leverage the insights that we're learning along the way, recognizing that oftentimes we will make some mistakes. And there will be things that do not go perfect on this journey, but that's okay. It's okay to fall forward, but we have to ensure that we're bringing others along. And so I love that level of accountability that you're leading from your organization, Joe. Kristen, I want to ask you this next question, because Brookdale is the largest senior living organization in the US, responsible really for just caring for the most vulnerable population, which is our elders. And so take us through the journey of really managing through COVID. Like, what happened when you all first learned of COVID and recognizing that you serve the most vulnerable? What were the conversations internally, and what mechanisms did you put in place to ensure that your residents were safe?
Yeah, it was something that our leadership team had really been watching. Even at the end of 2019 and into January, we had a good understanding that this pandemic may affect us and that it may change the lives of our organization and how our associates work every day and how we care for seniors every day. But by the time March came around, our leadership team set up an emergency command center to coordinate our response to the pandemic. So you can imagine calendar invites hitting everyone in the organization's calendars, morning, noon, and night over the course of several weeks and several months, to make sure that we were, as our clinical leaders, were really managing through those CDC, state and local health guidelines, right? Because as an operator in more than 40 states, not just one playbook set the rules for every community and every state. So we had to be very nimble in our approach to setting up those new cleaning and clinical PPE protocols, visitation protocols for family members. So our leadership team really transformed our business almost overnight. So we had to make sure that every local community brick and mortar location had a response to COVID, whether they were in a hotspot or whether they weren't in a hotspot, understanding that that hotspot may change, right, as the pandemic ebb and flows, and making sure that they were always focusing on putting the health and well-being of our residents and associates first. And we found that communication was absolutely critical during this time. Communication with the people that we serve, the residents living in our communities, as well as their family members, was absolutely a top priority. And a lot of hard decisions had to be made. When you tell a family member you can no longer visit mom or dad, those are difficult conversations to have with your customer. social media actually became a very invaluable tool for us. Each one of our brick and mortar locations has a Facebook page, and those family members really turned to social media to make sure that they were getting the most up-to-date information on what that particular community was doing to help keep their residents safe and also engaged. So I'm happy to say that our leadership was really focused on doing the right things. It was very inspirational to see everyone in our organization really rally together in our response to COVID. And of course, as marketers too, I mean, we had to quickly shift to reflect the new world around us. And we're still managing through that even today. So like I said, it's been very inspirational to be a part of an organization that has taken this so seriously. And it's changed our operations for the better. I think it'll last far into the future.
Well, first, let me just say thank you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for everything that is going on in your organization, because we've realized that these are more than businesses. These are people's lives on the line. And what you have just reflected are 3 points that we have to all keep in mind. You've got to be nimble in a time like this. You have to over communicate, be overly communicative, because people are just scared and they're fearful and they don't know what to expect. And so the more information that you can give, the better. But I think the thing that you talked about the most was empathy, and realizing that this is a human experience. And again, it's an emotional time. And so really dealing with the things that people will be dealing with emotionally is probably most important of all. And I would just say, based on my experience at Starbucks and the way that we've handled the pandemic, there are a lot of similarities between what you described, Kristen, and what we've gone through in terms of managing multiple locations across multiple states, multiple global locations, in addition to understanding that there are so many customers that we have to touch, and our employees don't have the luxury of working from home. We don't have a model where, people are online and working virtually. We go to stores and we wear masks and we serve frontline responders, and it's just coffee, but believe it or not, it's important. It's an important part of the American culture. And so really keeping the humanity at the core of all of this is critically important to supporting the brand. So thank you, Kristen. Haley, I want to pivot over to you from the agency side. I think there's a lot of research that needs to go into the insights that you're providing your clients, particularly around these issues that we're not familiar with navigating. So from your perspective, what pieces of advice can you give us on the importance of research during uncertain times?
Yeah, I think, to your point, Zhang, sometimes we have that luxury of having industry knowledge backed by research. 5 years ago when this happened, or X, Y, and Z in history told us these trends would occur. We didn't have that luxury, especially at the beginning of the pandemic outbreak. And so we couldn't look back and, say, hey, this is how we handled COVID-15, right? Or this is how we handled COVID-18. So we didn't have that luxury. And there was really a lot of soul searching that had to happen at the very beginning to say, what should I do? What shouldn't I do as a brand, as a human being? What's the right thing to do when you don't have that research? So a lot of, especially in the beginning, I think, of the pandemic was a lot of gut instinct, and those that were led by their values, by thinking from a human perspective, an empathetic perspective, really started to see positive reactions and engagement. But, as the pandemic progressed, I think, we tried to figure things out, what we could do, what we couldn't do. That's when we really started to be able to lean more and more on research. And it's super, super important that brands continue to do research throughout the year, that they started right when the pandemic hit and they continue, because as we've seen, there are crazy twists and turns to the pandemic, to all of the events of 2020, and how consumers behave 2 weeks ago is going to be markedly different than how they behave 2 weeks from now. So continuing research, and especially research that can give you a view into the day-to-day of your audience, is so important. So we talk about things at NEBO and research tactics at NEBO around anything to do with ethnographic research, right? So how do I get a viewpoint into my consumers day-to-day, doing ethnographies, whether that's, the great thing about ethnographic research is that everyone has a cell phone in their hand, and everyone can record their thoughts, their emotions, their videos in response to different questions. So anything that can give you a lens into how people's day-to-day lives have changed, are changing, and are going to change, I think is one of the key pieces of research that is so important for brands to do. And it's important that they do them rapidly. So it's important that we think about research as iterative, not as final. And what I mean by that, not only is that it's going to continue to shift and change, is that we need to continue to kind of do these pulses, right? So we need to just take what we can take, use that, act on it, and then iterate, right? So nothing's going to be perfect, and that is how it's going to be and how it is, but you can continue to learn, especially by continuing to track folks in their day-to-day and tracking consumer decision journey mapping as things progress and as things shift and change.
Well, Haley, I will say you definitely helped the audience with the way you answered that question, because I think oftentimes when we talk about research, people think that you have to take a look back far into the past. And what we've just learned from you is that every single day that something happens, we can track it, capture it, and use it for future learning. So it doesn't have to be decades ago in order for it to be considered research. It's really just an ongoing process. So thank you for that answer. James, I want to pivot, and I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the social unrest and social justice issues that we've seen play out, particularly with the lens of what happened to George Floyd. When that happened back in May and he was murdered on camera by a police officer, it was very shocking and alarming, and quite different than some of the other incidents that we've seen play out in the media because of the length of time that the officer's knee was on his neck. It was very painful for those of us that had the endurance or the stomach to watch the entire thing. It was almost unbelievable that a human being was being treated in that way and had to lose their life in that fashion. And it really shocked the world, and it rocked the world in many ways. And I think we paid attention more so than we would have in the past because of COVID, because we were all still, because we were all in our house in the middle of this pandemic with nowhere to go, nothing to do, no way to hide. We had to face what happened in a very real way, and brands did too. So as a diversity and inclusion practitioner, James, I'm interested to hear from you about how did your organization, particularly because of where you work, how did you say, or even begin to revisit your D&I strategy and revisit the way that your organization would work towards managing some of the I&D issues that come through?
Thank you so much, Sing. And before I answer you, as a parent of 2 small children during a pandemic, never say the words, "It's just coffee." Because, in all seriousness, just when 2020 had done the most, it did more. It has been relentless for all of us. And quite frankly, if you know of anyone who is working in I&D who tells you that this has not been the most challenging year of their career, it's one of 2 things. They're either not doing the work right, or they're lying to you. And I know this is an Atlanta audience, but like many of your companies, Twitter's a global org. So I'm gonna try to apply a global lens. This year has left none of us untouched. And while there are parts of our business that when all of this year and what it brought is far in the rearview mirror, they will contract to some version of a pre-normal time. That is simply not true for those of us who work in I&D. The conversations that we have been having for the very first time this year, they're not time bound. They don't end when the calendar simply flips to 2021. And so it's our responsibility to ensure that the teams who are doing this work are empowered on this journey over the long term. This is the saying, this is not a moment, this is a movement. And the way that we look at 2020 is we have had the opportunity to welcome millions more people around the world to this movement. So how do we do it? Well, we make investments for the long term. We do that in our tweeps, which is what we call our employees, but also in our programs. Let's take, for example, some of the work we did in investing in our tweeps. Most of us know what business resource groups are. And in Twitter's case, we've introduced formal comp programs. We're one of the first global tech companies to do it for the people who lead our business resource groups, like Blackbirds, because we recognize the cultural expertise that they have brought to the business, and their leadership, especially during this year, is critical. And so we need to treat it like we treat all leaders who are doing critical work at the company. We need to pay them for it. It's not a side hustle, and it's not a volunteer activity. On the programming side, we're designing new learning labs that we would have never previously before contemplated. In 2021, we're going to launch a series of learning labs that explore topics like anti-Blackness, systemic racism, enforcement and criminalization of race, all from a global lens. So every single tweet, no matter where you sit in any part of the world, in any role, has an opportunity for a deep dive on a quarterly basis to explore and understand and expand their thinking on topics that at the beginning of this year, we never would have dreamed would be front and center in this work. And so I am tired. God, I'm tired. But I have never been filled with more hope, because I think there's never been a more important time for all of us to be doing this work.
Well, James, thank you for what you're doing. And you're right. I'm tired too. I'm tired because of these little kids in my house, but I'm more tired because of exactly what you're describing, which is something that's been a part of the system for so long, and something that has worn us all down, and something that has us ready for change. And now is the time, to your point. You also said this is not a side hustle. This is not something that you can just choose to do on the side if you feel like it when you have time. This really has to be a part of the way that we work. It has to be the part of the way that we live our lives. Oftentimes, I'll have Starbucks partners ask me, well, what can I do today? What can I do right now? And I say, you need to educate yourself, but you also need to start living your personal life differently than your work life. You can't expect for your company to be the only thing that influences you to be a better person or to go on a learning journey. When you are home alone on the weekends, do some community service, volunteer, get out there and meet people that you're not comfortable with or that you have not been exposed to historically. Take yourself on a learning journey in your real life, and then bring those lessons to your job life. And then it will all make sense holistically, but you can't live down these two separate paths and put it to the side. This is something we have to do all the time. So thank you. Drew, I want to ask you specifically about investments. James just mentioned that companies are making a lot of financial investments and throwing dollars at racial justice and saying, here's our money, here's our check. We want to be a part of the change. But what the public has recognized in some of these instances is that it's almost a bandage to cover a wound, and it's not doing the real work. And it might even be, in some instances, for show or inauthentic. So how do you describe the difference between just putting money on an issue and doing the real work to get to the point where there is systemic change that we all can see?
Yeah, Zing, I think that one of the things that companies have to sort of reckon with is that for a lot of companies, their checkbook is their superpower, right? And so if your checkbook is your superpower, you should be writing a really big check, right? So that's part of it. But what I think is most important is to have sort of a 360-degree approach, in that if you're going to make investments in and the social justice issues, you should also be making investments in figuring out how the company and the brand shows up in marketing. That when you show up in marketing, and if you do actually segment, that you're thinking about, well, how do I have a reciprocal relationship between the brand and the people who bolster the brand? 92% of the population growth that's happened in America has happened from communities of color. But for many brands, I mean, that's a big number. Not 52%, but 92%. So if you don't have a multicultural strategy, you don't really have a growth strategy at this point. If you're a manufacturer, a retailer, a content platform. And so I think that what this moment in time is showing us is that those consumers have more voice and they have more choice than they've ever had before. And now's the time to start building a relationship with communities and constituents and consumers that has a modicum of reciprocity in it. That means that you're looking at not just writing a check to a social justice organization or an advocacy group, but you're looking at, what's my supplier diversity spend with this particular community? What are we doing from corporate social responsibility standpoint? What are we doing with making sure that we're listening to all of the voices internally, much to James's point, that we're not handing out bottles of water to Black and Hispanic people outside of the organization, when literally people inside the organization who are Black and Hispanic are on fire, right? So it really has to be an approach that is 360 degrees, that does think about what are all of our touch points, not just some of our touch points. That means that dollar that the company is spending is amplified and is exponentially has an exponential impact if all of those things are working together. Your D&I team should not be in a silo that's far away from corporate giving, should not be in a silo that's far away from marketing, right? And how we engage with the brand. All of those things should be intentional and connected and amplifying each other, so that when you go to market as a global corporate citizen or a local corporate citizen, you go to the market with a renewed sense of partnership with your consumers in that community. That's the only way that any of this works. Great, let's write big checks, but for some of the biggest brands that are in the industry, there are going to be some organizations that won't take a check from you if you don't have all of these other things working in the same way. And so it really has to be a plan and a strategy that looks at, how can this be 360 degrees? How can we leave sort of no part of the organization and the touch points out of it, but also who have we engaged to help us understand the consumer and the culture and the historic norms that are going on, so that we have that cultural competency layered on top of the data and analytics, the marketing program, the corporate goals, and that we then communicate what our impact has been, because the world is going to communicate the failures. We have to then be transparent and honest about how we communicate our impact, be it ever so incremental.
Zing,
Well,
do you mind if I?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
Jump in.
Do you mind if I jump in?
You better jump in.
Once again, Drew has said something that sparked a thought. It's so cool to hear you riff on that. One thing I just want to reflect on, that notion of not making your D&I team or your D&I practice some like separate thing, but integrating it into the heart and soul of what the company's culture and vision and values and priorities are. Man, that is, I just want to underscore that and highlight it and bold it, because that is critically important. There was one thing, Zing, that came to mind, maybe from a slightly different perspective, in answering your question about how companies are investing and where they're putting their money on this topic. and I'll answer that maybe in a slightly different angle, which is that, you know, I'm Dallas based. Hawkeye has been one of the biggest agencies in Dallas here for 21 years. I'm actually from Seattle, so from Edmonds, just north of Seattle. So Zing, we got to compare Seattle notes after this call. Big Starbucks fan. So, but in Dallas here, there was an agency that is an icon, an institution that its founder was recently ousted because of some racial comments. And you guys may have tracked it and heard of it. I think one of the things, it's a horrible situation, and I am genuinely concerned for the hundreds of people who will lose their jobs as clients are backing out of that agency. If there's silver lining in that, though, I think we also have to acknowledge that brands are just not putting up with nonsense anymore from their partners. They're not doing business with businesses who don't align in their values. And it's a hard pill to swallow in the Dallas community, because the Dallas creative community is actually a relatively tight-knit and small community, and we're doing everything we can to swarm our friends and colleagues to support them through this. But I also have to kind of give a high five to the, you know, directors of marketing and CMOs who said, we're pulling our business. We don't want to have anything to do with that. That takes guts. That introduces risk in their business at a time of great uncertainty with COVID and everything else that's going on in the world too. So I think one of the things that we can count on, and again, Drew, this goes back to what you started off by saying, but like, consumers are demanding that of the brands that they do business with. And I would say businesses are more and more then having to put pressure on their partners to say, wait a minute, do your values align with my values on this? And if not, we're going to go find another partner that's going to help us, continue to build our business. And I actually think that's a really good thing.
You know, Joe, you triggered the thought. So one of the other things that is good that has come from this year is that it is really laid bare that a commitment to confronting police brutality or systemic racism, it cannot be performed. Yeah. It must be authentic, because if it's not, people are going to notice, they're going to let you know they see you, and they're going to call you out. And so the way I think about it is, in order for it to be authentic, it needs to be appropriately contextualized. So at Twitter, you know, we've been on this journey a while, and while we might not always get it right, the commitment is clearly there, and we can point to our track record. So when we say Black Lives Matter, or call for criminal justice reform, or justice for Breonna Taylor, there's context. And then we make sure that those words and calls are backed up by action. So we make the big financial commitments that you see to social justice organizations. We elevate voices of Black creators and artists and activists and other people in the cities where these protests are happening. We continue the conversation within our walls by hosting all hands with folks like Dr. Ibram Kendi and Janet Mock, and even Jat moderated one with the Equal Justice Institute. We do all these things so the actions, the words are backed up by these actions. But I also want to talk about, like, if you're sitting there in the audience right now and thinking, well, that's great, you have this wonderful track record, so you can just continue to sprint. My company does want to do this, but like, we don't have the same track record. How do we start? It's the same way. Appropriate context. It's never a bad time to start. And if you want to start a journey, all you have to do, you don't have to have a track record to be authentic. You just have to contextualize your journey in what is appropriate for your brand or your company. So tell employees, tell your customers, what led you to the awakening in this moment? What commitments are you prepared to do transparently for all your stakeholders? And then just dig in and do the work. It's all about context and authenticity.
James, I think that's a really good point. And it also speaks back to that example that Joe mentioned of that really large independent agency in Dallas, where the founder made some terrible remarks. I feel for and yet am impassioned with hope, to Joe's point, not only because brands have held folks accountable, maybe for the first time, to your point, James, like it's now that we're starting to say we're going to start now, but also because the employees of that agency were the ones who raised the flag. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future. They were definitely putting their jobs in jeopardy. They were standing up to the founder of a company, and yet knew that this was wrong, that they felt that something wrong had happened, and they weren't going to let it go. And again, that's kind of this whole starting today kind of mentality, is that these employees felt emblazoned to do and to bring this up, with risking a lot of their jobs in a time where jobs are not exactly ample everywhere, right? And so to that point, I'm also emblazoned with hope in seeing that this could be the start of more companies looking ahead and taking a different stance.
Yeah, the demand from consumers as well as employees is just so much higher. We're all experiencing part of the ripple effect of an empathy gap that's out there, and brands are expected to help fill that gap. And the things that were acceptable to the folks who use our platforms and buy our products and services before, things that they were willing to just let go before, they now feel that this brand has a responsibility to me in a way that we just haven't seen that happen before. Part of it, I think, is that consumers now are recognizing how much power they have, right? There's lots of people who are out there sharing that. And I think that when people recognize their power, they move through the world differently. But it's also a point of younger consumers, and younger consumers in particular, and therefore consumers of color, because so many of our younger consumers are people of color, are looking at consumption differently. They're looking at consumption through the lens of conscious consumption. They're asking questions about, do people at this brand look like me, right? The people who work for this, does the brand hire people who look like me? Do I feel good about the commercials? When I see someone who, when I see, a Latinx family in this commercial, do I feel good about it as a Latinx man or as a Latinx or as a Latina, right? All of these things are things that consumers are looking at. They're also thinking, well, why should I spend my money with a company who doesn't support causes that are important to me? I spent 6 years doing data on millennial consumers and consumers of color at Nielsen when I was running multicultural marketing at Nielsen. And what we were telling manufacturers and retailers 4 years ago is that your consumer base is looking different now. It is a different demographic, and the way they're going to engage your product is going to be very different. If they have a great experience, they're not just going to talk about it to their sphere of influence at brunch or at the dinner table. They're going to pick up their device. And because of companies like the one that James works for and the one that I work for, their sphere of influence is huge. There's a reason why there's a person at the LA Times that follows Black Twitter to see what's gonna happen in the world next, right? And so conscious consumption is something that we all should have on the top of our minds as brand leaders and marketers, and as the D&I practitioners who are going to get a call from our brand partners to say, hey, help me figure out this trend that I'm seeing in this data that I just got, because there may not be as many people, there may not be as much diversity in that brand team as you see around this particular table right here, right? And so I think that that's going to be really important. If we're not talking to consumers with a level of specificity, we're going to lose them. And that's something that I think is going to be exacerbated by our sort of universal experience with COVID-19 exacerbated by our universal experience with racial injustice and Black Lives Matter. Because when we return to normal, which I keep hearing people say that, it will be a new normal. It will be a very new normal. And that's for consumers, constituents, platform users. That's about the content that people are consuming, all of those things. It will be new. It will be different.
Well, listen, this was just a very powerful dialogue between all of you. You brought up a couple of things that I just want to point out and reiterate for the audience. It sounds to me like this group thinks cancel culture is a real thing. And people will cancel your brand, and other brands will cancel being involved with your brand if they don't believe that you're on the right side of history. So we've really got to be cognizant of the messages that we're putting out there. I also heard from this group about the importance of internal engagement in addition to managing external stakeholders. We've got to take care of our own house. It's like if I were to show up tonight for dinner and my kids are hungry and I said, well, let me go feed the neighbor's kids first, and then I'll check on you later. It probably wouldn't make sense. It probably would make sense for me to feed my children first and make sure my house was in order before going outside to take care of the world. And I think our organizations have to think about this work the same way. We've got to take care of the folks that are inside of our organizations and ensure that we're maintaining a healthy corporate culture so that then we can then put our tentacles into the external atmosphere. And then the last thing I heard from you all is really about the illusion of inclusion. The illusion of inclusion is when you are doing things for performative reasons. So you'll have a boardroom of filled with people around the table. You might put a Black person at the table, and you might have a woman at the table. You might have someone who's Latino at the table, and you might put a gay person at the table. But if they don't have a voice, if they don't have any decision-making ability, any power in that structure, then it's all very performative. So we have to ensure that we're not operating the illusion of inclusion, but really every voice matters, which is what Joe said. People have to feel like when they show up, that they count. And that's what we're working towards. So we have some questions that are coming from the audience, but before I get to that point, I want to ask Kristen our last question from this moderated session before we open it up for Q&A from the audience. And I'll end on a positive note, Kristen. I want to talk about, there's some good coming out of all of this, and your brand has certainly had a number of beautiful stories that have been circulating around COVID and the pandemic and just everything we've been a witness to. And so I wonder if there's any particular story that stands out to you that you would be willing to share with the audience today.
You know, there have been so many, and I know that many of the folks who are joining us today have, you know, seen so many, like the people applauding in New York City out their windows when hospital workers are on shift change, right? And they're coming home, and essential workers are walking into the hospital to care with people who are suffering from COVID-19. So there have been so many of those uplifting and inspiring stories. One of the things that I remember very early on, you know, before you started to see the Heroes Work Here signs out front, essential healthcare organizations, we had family members who were doing things like, you know, decorating trees with cutout paper hearts, you know, when they couldn't enter a building to visit a loved one and their extended family, you know, who are associates. And decorating the outside of those trees so that they knew that their thoughts and hearts were with them, you know, as they were really working hard to keep coronavirus at bay. And so, you know, there's been countless stories like that, trying to make sure centenarians' birthdays get celebrated with their family members, even if it's about having folks outside of a window to sing happy birthday to them and to show up with balloons, right? It's remembering to celebrate all of those moments in difficult times that really keeps people going. So I know that everybody's familiar with a lot of those stories of appreciation, and there have been countless number of them, even some that haven't made the press, of course, but it's been an inspiring time.
Chris and it's funny. You inspired me to recall a moment where, again, even in this inspirational moment, it's a perfect example of the conversation we were just having about the importance of words matching your actions, right? So I have countless examples of people who were very eagerly out on their balconies, banging, and then walk down to the street, not wearing a mask, not practicing social distance. And what I think this year has brought us is so many opportunities for hope and inspiration, both as individuals and like humans, but also in communities, but then also an unprecedented level of accountability where you're not going to be able to continue to move forward in a world where you reap the benefits of performance if you are not backing it up with behaviors and actions that are equally aligned and equally deserve to be celebrated. Because I share your optimism around all the areas, especially in the healthcare sector, where there's just countless examples of inspiration this year, but also opportunity for all of us to back them up with actions so that we can end this pandemic that we can all agree has gone on way too long.
You know, that notion. Oh, sorry. Go for it, Zing.
No. You go, Joe, and then Drew was saying something, and then I'll go.
Drew, do you want to go or you want me to go?
No, I was just saying +1. We say +1 in the community at Facebook a lot. So I was saying +1 on that.
I'm giving a +1 on it too, because it's interesting that notion of accountability, I think, is making people feel a little uncomfortable maybe right now too, which is, and Laura and April kicked this whole thing off by saying, let's get a little uncomfortable in this conversation. So I'll maybe poke at something that's a little bit uncomfortable, but like this kind of notion of we're going to kind of do a DE&I thing over here because that's what we need to do in the moment, and we need to show some sign of it. I have to say that as someone who is responsible, and Zing, I'm so glad you called me out on it, because that's something I try to call myself out on all the time, is like the buck stops with me and my organization. I don't put it on anybody else to achieve the kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion standards that we have set. That is my responsibility. Now, it takes a lot of us to pull that off. It takes my CFO saying, we're not going to invest in this and we're going to invest in this. It takes my HR lead saying, when it comes to raises and promotions, we're going to set some standards and some parameters to ensure that that our promotions and raises reflect our DE&I principles, right? So it takes a whole lot of us coming together, but I'm ultimately responsible for it. I think there's a lot of people, and maybe it's a generational thing. I don't think it is. Maybe it's just life journey, and we're all on this journey in different moments of the journey together on this thing. But there are people who are very uncomfortable with having the conversation. And I think one of the things that I've learned through this process is that in those moments of discomfort, there can be the maximum amount of growth. And I've had so many people just in our little tight-knit circle at Hawkeye and our agency come to me and say, man, at the beginning of this, I wasn't even sure I would go off mute. Like I wasn't even sure I was gonna like jump in, but I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I'm getting armed with the language, the nomenclature. I've got people I can call on and talk to and challenge myself about. I've got a book I'm reading now, like there's all that's starting to happen right now in a way that what started maybe with some people going, Black Lives Matter, isn't that, that's that fringe thing out there that I don't have a role in. Now they're saying, wait a minute, that's something that is core and fundamental to so many organizations' values, principles, the reasons they exist, their future. And I think we've started to see that kind of pivot. And I will tell you, just from an accountability perspective, because James, you called this out, and I think this is totally right. So Hawkeye, we're one of the biggest agencies of our kind, and we've been really fortunate to add 20 new clients to our roster this year. And I will tell you, this isn't going to be an exact science, but like around 18 or so of the 20 all had some form of DE&I evaluation of the agency before they awarded us the business, meaning they wanted to know who their team was going to be. They wanted to know what our values and commitments were. They wanted us, and they many of them put in their contracts with us that they would be evaluating whether that was just a page in a PowerPoint we sent over, or if that's something that we were going to continue to live up to over time. So I think this is that notion of accountability. It starts within. It starts with those sitting at our dinner table. It starts with those on our Zoom calls every single day. But it's also about making sure that the partners we surround ourselves with, and Brookdale, by the way, we're so fortunate to get to work with Kristen and her team on a day-to-day basis, and we love it. But it's about who we surround ourselves with too, and making sure that we hold ourselves accountable, and that we're brave enough to say when we don't know, or when we screwed up. But that we all, make sure our intentions are stated clearly, that we're working towards a common goal there. So I appreciate it, James, you called that out.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. A super important thing to bring up in terms of when we don't know, we say that we don't know. And humility, I think when COVID-19 hit, humility was huge with the conversations around Black Lives Matter and all of the social injustice that is occurring right now. It is so important that people feel okay, that they're going to say, I don't know. And I know at NEBO, I've been a part of conversations, and I know leadership has certainly had conversations where, they are the first to admit we don't know everything, and we want to talk about it. We want to start putting things in place and actions in place immediately, but we also wanted to continue to improve, right? So we're learning, we're listening, we're oftentimes frustrated by the progress that we want to make, and we may not feel like we're making it, but we have to start. We have to say, this is where we're starting. We have to say, we don't have all the answers. We may fail, but if we don't try, we're always going to fail. We're never going to succeed. And I think humility and transparency in those conversations are so important to have.
Joe, I just want to acknowledge real quick the discomfort. I don't think you ever get to a point where these conversations are truly comfortable. And it's by design. Look, I am queer, I'm Latinx. I grew up in the Central Valley of California, the height of the AIDS crisis. It was terrifying to be me. I've been having these conversations all my life, and I still encounter situations where the conversation is by its very nature uncomfortable. And so that's when you have to, if you were just an individual practitioner, you have to lean into that discomfort and really explore where it's coming from. And then if you're a DEI practitioner, it's your responsibility to give people the tools to explore that discomfort in a way that's respectful, empowering, and impactful across the communities. I'm reminded of way back in Q1 when COVID hit. From a global perspective, we were getting a lot of questions of how do we show up right now. And at Twitter, we have 4 allyship practices. They're learn, ask, show up, and speak up. So when COVID happened, we published a blog. You can go and you can Google it. We published a blog called How to Practice Allyship Right Now, COVID-19. And it explored conversations like anti-Asian racism and misinformation and xenophobia from a global lens, all through here's how you practice these 4 principles of learn, ask, show up, speak up. Now, of course, what we didn't know at the time is that would be how to practice allyship right now 1.0, because when Black Lives Matter hit, we were getting the same questions of people who are who had the desire to show up as allies, but didn't have the words, didn't have the vocabulary, were worrying about saying the wrong thing. So we revamped it from the lens of Black Lives Matter, and it's called How to Practice Allyship Right Now, Black Lives Matter. And just when you think we can let up, in the United States, we're preparing for an election. We are starting to have conversations with our Blackbirds, which is our Black ERG, about the End SARS movement in Nigeria. It is a never-ending practice of trying to explore sometimes new, but always uncomfortable conversations, and doing it with the humility and empathy that so many of you have already raised.
Can I just say add one piece to
Absolutely.
that? Because I couldn't agree with those notions more, is that these conversations will be uncomfortable. In addition to that, inclusion, equity, they require extra effort. Everyone has to get comfortable with the fact that inclusion and empathy requires extra effort. It will always require extra effort. Everyone has to be okay with the fact that it will require extra effort, because so many of the other things that we prioritize in our business require extra effort. Innovation requires extra effort. Creativity require extra effort. Inclusion and diversity, they feed into that creativity. They feed into that innovation. They feed into more efficient and effective teams. And so that's the piece of it that I think that leaders, managers, strategists, we all have to get our minds wrapped around the fact that I can't just do inclusion in sort of an unintentional, on autopilot way. It will change, it will ebb, it will flow. Inclusion is living and breathing. It is difficult, but it is worth it. And it will require more of me and for me to be intentional. That's table stakes. It just is table stakes at this point.
Well, listen, this is powerful what we're discussing. You all are absolutely right. My key takeaways from that discussion were with regard to what Joe was talking about, the highest levels of accountability. You know, I grew up as an HR practitioner and did this work under the umbrella of HR for the majority of my career. And as I progressed, I realized that this is a business function. And right now at Starbucks, I report into our chief operating officer, because she's got tentacles into every facet of our business. And this is really the way that you mobilize diversity, equity, and inclusion, is to be tethered to the highest part of the business. So again, we don't want to operate in the illusion of inclusion and put this under an HR umbrella. This is a business imperative. And the last thing that I'll say before our Q&A starts is that diamonds are made under pressure, right? The most beautiful stone, the most precious thing that everyone wants to get their hands on. It takes a lot of pressure to make a beautiful diamond. And so we have to keep our eyes on the prize as it relates to where we want to end up and how we want to see our companies evolve and how society evolve. But we've got to understand that it's going to take a lot of pressure and a lot of work up front, but it'll be well worth it in the end. And so let's move to Q&A from the audience. I'll just jump right in. There's some great questions that are coming through. So audience, first of all, thank you for staying so engaged. Thank you for hanging in there with us. We've been on the phone for over an hour already, but it seems like we just got this conversation started. So Joe Kaufman asked our first question, and he says, would love for y'all to talk about Wells Fargo CEO Charles Scharf's comments that there's a limited pool of Black talent to recruit from. It seems like the need to nurture diverse talent along every part of the talent pipeline is what we need to do. How, as marketers, can we help brands not just talk, but do the right thing?
That dovetails nicely into what Drew just said. Yeah, it takes effort to recruit good talent. Yeah, welcome to our world. Like, yeah, when I heard that, I shook my head and smiled a little bit, because I just went, you know, Drew, I'm still in your words now, man. Yeah, innovation is hard, but we do it because it's worth it. Good creativity is hard, but we do it because it's worth it. Nurturing diverse talent, and by the way, the notion, but he's not wrong, right? Like, it requires some effort. Like, you got to go build relationships, and you got to build a talent pipeline. And if you're a bunch of white people in a big white boardroom thinking that, oh, you know what we'll do? We'll just go talk to a, historically Black college and that'll do the trick. Like, are you kidding me? So this requires this conversation in every organization, whether you're a big technology platform like Facebook or Twitter, or you're a creative shop that is primarily fueled by human energy. Talent is the central resource anymore. Human energy is the central resource. And so this conversation about not just how do we attract good candidates and diverse candidates, but how do you make sure that the interview process is going to accept and welcome and be able to evaluate those candidates on equal and just terms. The number of times I've heard organizations say, well, we interviewed some Black candidates, but they just weren't the right culture fit. I mean, let's get uncomfortable for a minute. Whose problem is that? That's probably the culture of the organization that's doing the interview. If you've interviewed a bunch of really good people who apparently aren't a good fit, I mean, maybe you got to look a little bit inward, right? But it happens all the time, and we hear it. And then how do you make sure that if you do hire a diverse candidate into your organization, that they're onboarded appropriately, that they're titled appropriately, that they're set up for success, and that they've got a good salary and are on a track for mentorship and growth? Because chances are, and it's funny, at Hawkeye, there's a really good friend and a partner of mine in the organization, and she and I had a long conversation as Hawkeye was continuing to reiterate and roll out some of our commitments. And she goes, Joe, every organization I've ever been at, I've been the senior most Black woman in that organization. And it haunts me because I think to myself, you know, how do we make sure that good mentorships are established so that once you do attract really great talent, that you retain and you nurture them, right? And so it's, to a degree, it's common sense, but the fact that that comment still resonates and echoes in corporate America today is just, I think it's a sign of the times. And yet the reaction to it, if again, maybe there's a little silver lining, is probably a good sign that we're not going to stand for that anymore, that that's not an acceptable excuse for anything. And so it's a topic that I will say we have spent quite a bit of time on at Hawkeye, and we continue to work with our clients on this topic too, because they're struggling to find the right words and the right mechanisms to address the issue of talent, and you know, particularly around DE&I and its influence on it. So,
and I'll just jump in.
Perfectly, Drew, into what you were just saying. Yeah, it's hard.
I'll just jump in really quickly. I know Drew wants to say something about that too. We obviously both feel passionate about the topic. As a Black professional, I will tell you, there is no shortage of us in the marketplace. It really is important for companies to start looking in new and unexpected places for talent. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by new and unexpected places? Well, if you know that your industry is highly homogenous and you only go to your industry for talent, then you're going to only get people that are homogenous, right? So you have got to start to think about new ways of working, the same way that we jumped into COVID and we all got really, really technologically savvy. And now we know how to do Zoom and Teams meeting like none other, because we were able to adapt very quickly to a circumstance. This is how organizations that are really trying to lean into diversity need to adapt. They've got to go to new and unexpected places, but the talent is there. And trust me, there is no shortage of the talent. Drew?
Yeah, I just want to triple double down on that. I agree with everything you said, Joe, except for the fact that he's right, because he's absolutely not right. 2 million African Americans aged 25 or older in this country have advanced degrees. And many of those folks, while they may not be in financial services specifically, their skills and their experiences are absolutely 1000% transferable. I mean, he could just go to, I'm thinking the National Black MBA Association has 14,000 active members right now, and more than 50,000 folks who are on the roster and on the books, right? And so I get it. I agree that you don't just say, hey, let's go to HBCUs and find Black people, right? There are Black people with skills and knowledge to be able to fill roles all over the place. It is the deficiency of the teams who are looking for talent when they say that they cannot find, that there's a limited talent pool. And I think just a little bit of examination of how the Wells Fargo CEO got his job, you'll see that there's some pretty interesting things there that on how he specifically got his job working for Jamie Dimon a million years ago, right? And how
Oh, Drew.
yeah. So, I'll leave it at that. But I'm sure that those 2 million Black folks with advanced degrees, if their family friends knew the CEOs of all the other Fortune 500 companies, they probably would be in that pool a lot faster, right? But yeah, you're right about the fact that I love the fact that this moment is that 2 years ago, I think he could have gotten away with saying that and not have been lampooned the way that he has been, and I applaud his lampooning.
If I had to TLDR that, I would say, sir, we disprove the it's a pipeline problem concept about 10 years ago, and we're in 2020, so get on board.
There it is.
But beyond that, what I'd love to share, because there's so many marketers at Twitter, we have a program called Inclusive Marketing, and it has 5 central principles. We've workshopped that across our entire business globally, and we're about to launch an e-learning program centered around empowering people to act on these 5 principles. So principle number 1, always hire the most qualified candidate. It's the most important thing you can do. But 2, start with a candidate pool that reflects our diverse communities. One of the reasons why our sector looks the way it does and has so much work to do in this area is because we've developed some really terrible habits. Only sourcing from certain schools, requiring very specific educational requirements, or knowing who we want to hire in a role before the search is even launched. And inclusive hiring requires that we break all of those habits and relearn better habits. Principle number 3 is ensuring a fair and equitable process, like reviewing job descriptions, standardizing questions, screening in versus screening out to identify and remove any parts of bias. Because one of the things what we know is bias loads processes. So the more that you can set standards and processes around your principles and then apply them equally across teams, the better chance you have of eliminating bias. Principle 4 is the likability factor, or gut, is really tempting to follow when you want to hire, but it often leads you in the wrong direction. If the goal is to continue to grow and evolve your talent and your teams and the company, sometimes it works against you. So instead, you need to focus on core competencies and look for someone who's actually going to bring something new to your team and not be just more of the same. And then just the last principle, and then I'll shut up. Candidates want to see themselves and their needs reflected in the processes. And the more they do that, the more likely they are to accept the offers and the more likely they are to say. So ask yourself, is your interview panel diverse in gender, race, role, tenure, seniority? And if it's not, what steps can you as a hiring manager or leader to better reflect the diversity of the community that you're trying to attract every step of the process? And now I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry.
Thank you for those 5 tips. Don't apologize. Hopefully our audience members were taking notes, because I think those are 5 things for us to really consider as we think about pipeline. We only have time for one more question, guys. This went so fast. And again, I'm so sad to wrap this up, but this last question is from Brian. And his question is, given the gravity of the moment, can you all talk about how much brand trust matters now and in the future?
Do we have another hour and a half? I'll lob one in, and then Drew and James and everybody else will have to clean up my comments a little bit. But I'll take a step back and just say, how much does trust matter in this moment? I think what COVID and what Black Lives Matter and what the last 8-9 months have really revealed is where there are cultures of trust and when there are not cultures of trust. It has started to really expose that. And you look at, I use this example of this agency founder making some racist remarks and that the fallout of that here in Dallas. It was because there was not a culture of trust in that organization that what transpired, right? And you start to think about the relationship that companies have established with their customers, companies have established with their employers over time. What trust allows is for people to make mistakes and brands to make mistakes because intentions are clear. But when those intentions are said and not lived, when there's this false sense, Zing, you used a phrase earlier that I tried to jot down, and then I quickly was listening to the next thing you were saying, but that kind of facade of that some companies and brands can put up, we just start to erode our trust. And then when things are said or done that start to go, wait a minute, that's not where I want to spend my money. That's not where I want to do business. That's not a company I want to do business with. It just starts to galvanize and solidify it. There's a really great book. Many of you have probably read it, by Kim Scott. And it's a book called Radical Candor. And it's a phenomenal and quick read about organizations that are based on trust and organizations that aren't based on trust, and how trust is kind of the foundation of relationships. And it's a great shorthand, I think, for anybody who's looking to, in a relationship with a client or even in your own organization, to start to instill some of that.
Yeah, trust is everything. It was a lot before this year. It is everything now. And that it becomes increasingly important to earn and keep trust. We talk a lot at NEBO about, trust and attention are two of the scarcest resources we have. And it's so true. People are watching. At the beginning of COVID-19, people were not buying things. They were locked down in their homes. They were watching how your brand responded, what your brand did, and we're waiting and we're taking notice of that. So when they did decide to buy, when they did decide to take action, when they did decide to engage, they had a feeling, right? It's all based on this element of trust. And I think one of the things we haven't talked about is Gen Z, and the fact that this latest generation is not taking, is requiring that they trust you, is requiring that you stand up for something, you earn their trust. And they have a lot of buying power, and they are the future. So it's really important if brands want to think about the future, that they start thinking about their future buyers as well, and their buyers right now. And that is Gen Z who's going to be holding them accountable. I mean, between the pandemic and Black Lives Matter, they say that those are, the two most impactful events of their lifetime. And trust is so important in how they view your company, for both of those times.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. This has just been a phenomenal conversation. I'll just share one of my favorite quotes with you all. It says, "There is no beauty without truth, and there is no truth without transparency." And today we had a beautiful conversation that was full of honesty, authenticity, and sharing good nuggets with one another for how we rough times, but how we also see the silver lining, and how we stay optimistic and hopeful and keep people around us optimistic and hopeful, knowing that the best is yet to come. So I'd like to thank AMA, I'd like to thank AMA, and I'd also like to thank NEBO for sponsoring this wonderful event. Panelists, thank you so much. James, Haley, Joe, Kristen, Drew, you all are just phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom. Let's keep in touch, and let's keep this conversation going. It's okay if it's a little uncomfortable. Like I said before, it's going to get us to the right place. So God bless, take care, and see you soon.
Thank you, Zing.
Thank you, Zing.
Thanks to you, Zing.
Thanks, Zing.